this is where we left off since the last video, and so far so good. Everything is still under control, and yeah, everything is still simple. But later on we're gonna introduce a lot more nodes, so these are gonna become a real mess, and it's going to be a pain in the butt to keep track of everything. So now it's a good time to start reorganizing our nodes a bit. So let's go ahead and zoom in this part, and let's go ahead and change our nodes a bit before grouping everything. So this multiply node, it doesn't have to be here. So let's cut the connection here and connect it from this reroute node into this multiply node. It's not gonna change anything. It's going to be pretty much the same. The math is still the same. Now we're gonna control Shift D to duplicate this multiply node, and for this one we're gonna connect to the length node here, and let's move all of these nodes down here. There we go. And let's go ahead and group these three wires, and move this here, and move everything here back a bit. Alright, now let's go ahead and select everything from the add node all the way to this X and Y scale node, and Control G to group everything. And let's go back out and change the name of the node group to space warp. There we go. And hit tab to go back in, and let's go ahead and set our parameters for the node group. So this one is going to be the warp strength, and let's move it down a bit. Next, we need to create an XY scale input for the node group. So name this one XY scale. There we go. And let's move this X and Y scale up. And the last input is the Z scale. There we go. And move this up a bit as well. Now for the X and Y scale, the default value should be 0.65. And the warp strength, maybe just set this to default to 0.1. And the vector, just hide the values. Alright, everything's ready. Alright, so this is our node group, and I'm going to show you again the node setup so that you can figure out your mistake if you have made any. So let's hit tab to go back out, and this X and Y scale value just lost the actual value, so we need to set it again, 0.65. There we go. So now we can reuse this space warp node to add more details to our material, to our texture. So just copy this node, and this time increase the scale a bit. There we go. And lower the strength to maybe something lower, 0.05. Nah, too small. So increase a bit. There we go. And for the Z scale, let's go ahead and change it a bit. Alright, now we can add even more details to our texture by duplicating the space warp again. And for the third level of details, let's increase this a lot more, maybe even more, and lower the strength to something smaller. So as you can see, we now have a very nice looking wood grain, and it looks very much like wood right now. It's just that there is no color. And that's exactly what we're gonna do next. We're gonna add colors to our wood. And to do that, we simply go over here and add a color and mix RGB, and connect this to the factor input, and we can set the two colors for our wood. And also Now it's a good time to start creating a material, I mean a shader. Okay, so now we have something that looks very much like wood, right? So let's go ahead and test our wood a bit before moving on to add the bump and the stuff. So create a geometry input node and connect the position to this node. There we go. So now we can move this block of wood to cut the wood at a different position, like so. And now we have something like this. Let's move it back here. So as you can see, the way we cut the wood will create a different kind of wood texture for us. For example, let me just scale it like this and move it over here. So this is actually the center of the tree trunk, and the further away from the trunk, the more curved the grains will be, right? And let me just move this here, and again you can see these kind of warpy kind of texture. This is actually the center of the tree, and here we have a much smoother grain, and this is because we are moving further away from the trunk. So yeah, the way you cut the wood is also important because it dictates the part of the tree that you are seeing. So let's go ahead and scale it along the Z a bit, I mean the y-axis a bit, and let's move along the Z and see. Alright, now let's create a monkey and go ahead and link the material to test our material and subdivide the monkey. There we go. So as you can see, we have something very nice. Alright, let's go ahead and connect the object texture coordinate again, so that the texture will move with the object instead of staying still. And go to the top view. And for now, let's just set the warp strength of all of these back to 0 so that we can work on some other thing. Let's connect here and there. Okay, so you can see all of these bands kind of have the same thickness, and we don't want that. We want some bands to be thicker than the others. So go ahead and go to this length node, and let's go ahead and move everything back a bit. Let's move all of these nodes forward a bit so that we have some more space, and create a noise texture. Now let's not put it there, Control Z. Alright, put it here and change this to 1D and connect this value to the W input of the noise, and create a math node. Connect this noise to the math and change this to multiply, and finally duplicate this multiply and multiply it with the original length information. So now we can see we have different length for, I mean different thickness for the bands. However, the noise is affecting too much, so let's lower this value a bit. Now this should be add instead of multiply. So yeah, let's go ahead and increase this number a bit to increase the effect of the noise. So now you can see we have different thickness for our bands, and we can also change the size of the noise to further randomize the thickness of the noise, I mean of the bands. It doesn't matter very much, we just need some randomization for our bands. It doesn't matter much, so yeah, let's just leave everything as is. Alright, I just realized there is some problem with this particular multiply node, so let's go ahead and Alt D and remove it, like so. Just delete it and go back to the space warp node and connect this multiply node, the multiply 110 node, to the add before the output. Okay, let's hit tab to go back out, and as you can see, we now have the exact same result. but with one less node here. And this is actually quite important because Blender actually has a node count limit. If we have too many nodes in a single material, then Blender will just render it as a black color. So yeah, we need to keep the number of nodes as low as possible. Now let's take a look at the wood, and you can notice that it looks too clean. The colors are uniform pretty much everywhere, so we need to add some color variations to our wood material. Now we need to create another texture coordinate system, and this is the cylindrical texture coordinate. If you don't know what it is, you can look it up. If you're in high school, then I'm pretty sure that you can recognize this kind of math. So let's create a gradient texture and change this to radial. There we go. And connect this texture coordinate after the 3 level of warps. And let's visualize it. So this is a gradient texture going from 0 to 1, but here we want it to be 2 pi instead of 1. So create a math node and multiply this with 2 pi, 2 times pi. There we go. So now we have 0 to 2 pi going in a radial gradient like this. Alright, so with this we're gonna create our cylindrical texture coordinate system, and this is the angular coordinate, and we need a z coordinate as well, and the radius coordinate. So it's a 3D cylindrical coordinate system. Go back here, and we need to extract the z dimension of this object texture coordinate. So let's move this here. Alright, so we can now combine these 3 values into one single cylindrical texture coordinate system. This will be the x value, and the length will be the radius, and finally we have the z dimension. So this is our cylindrical texture coordinate, and let's go ahead and create a test texture. Let's say a Voronoi. There we go. So as you can see, the Voronoi texture kind of warp around the center like so. But we want to get rid of this nasty seam here. So yeah, we're gonna make this texture seamless around the angular axis, the angular coordinate. So to do that, let's go ahead and cut this wire and duplicate this, change this to sine, and Control D to duplicate it. This will be cosine. There we go. And connect these 2 nodes with the multiply node here, and this sine value will be our x, and let's change this to 4D, and this cosine value will be w. There we go. So now we have a seamless texture around the center, and now we need to control the stretch of the texture. So let's go ahead and create a combine xyz node, and this is going to be our stretch vector. So let's go ahead and stretch our texture a bit. So create a vector math node and change this to multiply, and multiply it with this combine xyz. Now for the x and the w, let's go ahead and create a value node. Connect here, set this to 1, and create a math node, and multiply this with the w dimension, value, like so. And for the y and the z, just set a number like so. So as you can see, the x value here control the stretchiness around the angular value, the angular coordinate, and the y value will stretch along the radius, and again the z value will stretch along the z dimension. So that's how you can use a cylindrical texture coordinate to play around with your texture. So now we have something very nice like this. And let's go ahead and play a bit more with our texture, with our stretch. And let's go ahead and create a noise instead of a Voronoi texture. There we go. And connect this to the vector and change this to 4D. And this one connect to the scale. There we go. And let's go ahead and lower the X value like so. So now you can see we have some very nice variations around the wood. But yeah, the Z dimension is a bit too much. So let's go ahead and stretch it as well. Alright, so this is our noise. And let's take a look at the color output instead of the factor. And let's go ahead and delete that Voronoi. And you can see the color output is actually just 3 different noises. So let's go ahead and separate the colors. And this is the red. It's exactly the same as the factor output. So yeah, it's actually just the red channel of the color. So we also have the green and the blue, which are just variations of the noise. So let's use the red channel for now and create a color ramp and increase the contrast of the noise a bit. There we go. And maybe set it to something like that. And maybe lower the X value a bit more. Yeah, maybe this should be good. Alright, so let's move this color ramp here. Now you can actually use this however you like, but for me I'll just use the soft light blend mode to mix it with the original color of the wood. There we go. So this is the after and this is before. Okay, so I think the soft light is a bit too much, so we can actually lower this value to lower the intensity of the color variation, and maybe change the contrast a bit. There we go. So now we have some very nice color variations for our wood. And we can also go back here and play a bit with the stretch of our noise. For example, I can increase this like so. And let's just visualize the noise. There we go. And maybe increase it a bit more. And increase the Y value a bit. So let's see the result and increase the contrast a bit. There we go. Now let's call this the color variation. Okay, and we need to create maybe some rot in between the grains of the wood, and for that we're gonna use the blue channel. So let's go ahead and create a map range node and connect the blue channel in. And now let's go ahead and play a bit with the from min and from max value to play with the contrast of the rot. And maybe let's lower this from max value a bit more. Now let's have a closer look at the map range node. And as you can see, if we increase this to min value, the rot kind of disappeared. So we can see that this to min value control the amount of rot. So let's go ahead and create a value node and another math node and change this to subtract and connect the value to the second input, and for the first value set to 1. So this basically just invert the value. So connect this to the two min values. So now if we set the the value here to 1, we get the maximum amount of rot, and if we set it to 0, we get no rot at all. So this value here will now be called rot strength. There we go. So let's set it to 1 for now, and let's go back here and duplicate this mix node and create a reroute node and connect it to the factor. And this color connect to the second color, and the first color will be the color of the rot. So we can set it to something like dark green. Let's see how it looks. There we go. But let's set it to something else, not dark green, but something closer to gray, blue. There we go. And we can control these two values to spread the rod a bit more. And let's go ahead and reduce the intensity of the rod. Now check this out. It looks very much like wood, right? And let's go ahead and lower the specular and increase the roughness a bit so that we can see the wood texture a bit cleaner. Alright, so now it looks pretty nice and very much like wood, but it's still not there yet because we still need to add a bit more details. But first, the node setup is becoming a bit of a mess, especially this bunch over here. So now it's a good time to clean up our node a bit more. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare to keep track of everything. Alright, it looks a lot cleaner, and for the sake of clarity, let's create a frame. Alright, let's put all these nodes into the frame. There we go. So it's a lot easier to understand the node setup. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's take a closer look at our wood. Now, some of you might know that real wood is actually a bunch of microtubes, and when we cut through those microtubes, we will have some very small vertical creases along the wood grain like this. Alright, to create the microtubes, let's go back to the second space warp and let's move everything back a bit so that we have more space. Create a reroute node and create a vector math node, and change this operation to scale and connect this space warp here. There we go. And duplicate this space warp node and connect this one over. For the X and Y scale, let's just set this to 1 for now, and let's just leave everything else for now. And now let's go ahead and create the microtube texture. It's going to be a Voronoi texture, and it's going to be 2D. There we go. So you can see these are our microtubes, and if we increase this scale value, you can see we have a lot of nice microtubes, and you can see these creases looks very much like wood. Okay. Now I want to create a single value that will control the scale of the warp as well as the Voronoi texture. So I'm going to create a value node, and I'm going to divide it by 100 and divide. There we go. So this will give me a lot more precision in controlling the scale. So I'm going to connect the divide node to this scale, and let's increase this a bit. There we go. So now you can see I can use this one single value to control the noise warp as well as the Voronoi texture. So let's set this back to 100. There we go. Now I also want to control this warp strength using this same value. However, I want the higher value to have smaller warp strength. So I'm going to duplicate this divide node, and I'm gonna connect this value to the second input of the divide node and connect this to the warp strength. And now let's set this to 11 for now. Yeah. Okay, so you can see if I increase this value, I get smaller noise as well as weaker warp strength. So let's go ahead and create a map range node, and let's play around with the from min and from max value. Okay, so for the sake of simple controls. Let's create a value node and create a math node and connect the value node to the from min, connect also to the math node and the math node to the from max value. And here let's set this to maybe something like 0.03 and increase this number a bit. There we go. Now as you can see, this number is actually controlling the blurriness of the holes. You see? So when I increase this number, you can see the holes become blurry, and if I reduce this number to something like 0.01, I get very sharp looking holes. But this should never be 0, alright? So it should be something very close to 0 but never be 0. So let's just set it to 0.03, I mean 03 for now. Okay, so this is our microtubes. Let's go ahead and use this to make the colors for the wood. So let's move these forward. There we go. So we're gonna just soft light it with the wood color. So use soft light and connect this to the second input and play with the factor to control the amount, I mean the intensity of the microtubes. Okay, there we go. Alright, we now have some very believable wood texture, and you can actually use this right away, but we're not there yet because we still need to add some horizontal creases, because usually when you cut the wood you have to use some kind of saw, right? And when the saw cut through the wood, it's going to leave the saw mark. So yeah, we're gonna need to create the saw mark next, but it's going to be another story for another day, because this tutorial is already long enough. I'm gonna leave that for the next video. For the time being, let's call it a day. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.